Going on with our discussion of yoga, Yoga Explained. Last time, you will remember, we were talking about the consciousness of the different chakras of the spine, or the centers of consciousness and energy in the subtle part of our being, the astral body, wherein all the power from the infinite Father as consciousness and energy flows through us, through the medulla center, through the different spinal centers, so that we can operate as not only human beings, but if we supersede the worldly consciousness, as true children of God should act. And last time we discussed, as I have said, those centers, and just a little review of that, just giving you the highlights, especially about these different consciousness which comes from the different centers. The centers are the coccygeal, the sacral, the lumbar, the dorsal, cervical, and the medulla, and the thousand-petal lotus at the supreme center of consciousness at the top of the head, or in the brain. Now, first, let us take up the supreme center, wherein we find ideas of God. God's ideas. They are the foundation of all activity of the astral and physical body. And if we can lift our consciousness to the supreme center at the top of the head, there we're in God's consciousness, because there are located His ideas. But these have to be spiritually discerned. They cannot be known through the senses, mind, or intellect, reasoned or inferred. You have to be one with God's consciousness to know these subtle things. So, the supreme center, the thousand-petal lotus, is the seat of pure consciousness, God's pure consciousness. It's easy enough to feel consciousness of the lower parts of the body and the lower centers, because we live in that every day in this drama of life. But in meditation, you can feel the higher states of consciousness in these different centers. So coming down one now to the lumbar center, the two-petal center, which is seen at this point, there we find that the consciousness of the causal body, of which we are going to talk tonight, is found between this point and the supreme center in the brain. Because why? Because the causal body is the body of ideas. And ideas are God's ideas, because He has made universe upon universe, and He has made us, the three bodies which we have, the causal, the astral, and the physical body, are His ideas. So, remember, if you were to know the causal body of which we will talk tonight, the idea body, you must keep your consciousness high. Up toward the second center, or the sixth center it is called, the medulla center, which you see at this point, and between that and the supreme center. That's where the causal body can be located and can be entered into, so to speak. In these subtle things, we have to be one with states of consciousness, because they're not known by reason and inference or thought. But as you enter into the state of God's presence within you, then you know. So these things are important. Now, coming down one more center to the 16-petal lotus, which is the center of the neck, so to speak. There's a vertebra that sticks out here, some people more than others. Well, right there is one of the centers of consciousness, known as the center of the 16-petal lotus center, or the cervical center. Now, what consciousness do we find there? Just the high points. There you get a consciousness of expansion. If you can elevate your consciousness up the spine to this point, you will find it much easier to get an expansion of consciousness out around. The soul begins to expand to God's omnipresence, which it is. Each one of us is that. The word God, the word Guru, who has the omniscience of God, and your own self mean the same thing. But not the self tied to the body. That's quite different. But the self freed means it's God. We mustn't forget these great truths which have been brought out since ages, especially from India and other ancient countries. So much for the center, civical center, consciousness there. That's just the main consciousness. I'm picking out just the highlights, so to speak. Now coming down one more to the heart center, which is between the shoulder blades. As you want to arouse it, push your shoulder blades together in your meditation. It keeps your attention there. There we find the touch. The touch. And the heart center is important to us who practice yoga because by stilling the heart and the action which it derives from this center, the center of touch, the senses are cut off. And when you shut off the senses, you are freed very much from attachment to the body. This is the different senses of which we have talked before. 5 senses of knowledge and the 5 senses of action. The 5 senses of knowledge, smell, taste, touch, hearing, and so forth, which keep us tied to outward consciousness. When the heart slows down, it shuts those off. And it's much easier to go within and find the presence of God. If your attention is all out on these different centers outward, it's difficult to go inward, of course, because God is not found in outward consciousness. So the heart center is important for those who practice yoga because it shuts off, switches off the different senses, so to speak. Of course, it is the center of touch, just like when you touch that, you feel it in the heart center mostly. And so when the heart slows down and you shut it off, the touch doesn't bother you. Same with all the other senses. So that's the 12-petal lotus. Now coming down to the next one, the lumbar center, which is opposite the navel, the spine. That is the center of automatic consciousness, so to speak. Reflex action and things like that are found here. Also here we have the center of fear. You know, when you get afraid, you feel it right there, don't you? The pit of the stomach or just a little below. Also the center of fortitude. That's why you can overcome all fear, because that's the center of fiery self-control, as you will read in the different, the Gita and such books on Hindu philosophy. So remember that important thing, that the lumbar center is, although it is the center of fear, still it is the center of fiery self-control, where you can make the effort to get up out of the consciousness of the 3 lower centers of the spine and be free from the attachment to this world existence, because fiery self-control is there. Also, if you have indigestion, it comes from disruption of that center. But you have fiery self-control to throw it off. Get up out of it. Then going down to the sacral center, also another thing I hear, gravity is offset in that center. As you rise above that center, you will not feel the gravity of the body. You'll not feel the weight of the body, which you feel so easily, especially if you try to jump. But as you get above that, consciousness above that center, you'll feel gravity will be lessened in your consciousness, because that's the center of it. Then coming down to the sacral center, which is the second center in the spine, this is a very important center because of a strong touch sensation brought about by the current, the life force in your body going outward towards senses and worldly living. It's a very important center. The pull down is very strong in the second center. And that's why it's so easy for the current to go out in sex and other things, because the downward pull is very strong. So in your meditation, if you feel hard to get out of that center, feel an attachment, push hard. You have God's will in you. As we see tonight, God's will created all things. So this it is important to know that there's a strong downward pull outward, but we have the power to rise above it, reverse the current. All people who feel the presence of God have reversed that current. There's no question about it. And then the current, instead of going downward and outward, goes inward and upward toward the supreme center of the brain. And the last center is the coccygeal center at the base of the spine. And this, the most important thing here, is spoken of in the Gita, because this is the earth center. The different elements which make up the body and the earth and so forth, and this world existence, are found in the different centers. So this, the lower center, is the center, the earth center is called, and then the water center comes the next center up, then the fiery self-control, fire center, and then the air center, finally the ether center in the 16-petal lotus. So this first center, the coccygeal center, is important because from that center, as we read in the Gita, I am the wholesome fragrance exuding from the earth. The yogi also feels God's consciousness vibrating in the coccygeal center with its sacred fragrance of the earth. So, and if you feel the subtle fragrance in your meditation, that's where it comes from. Some people get these different fragrances, colors, odors, and so forth, because they're all in the astral. There are just a few things from last week's lecture which perhaps will reinforce in your mind the different consciousness of these different centers. And tonight we're taking up the causal or the idea body. Causal or idea body. And to understand that, you will see that you have to be practically one with God's consciousness in the supreme lotus in the brain. Your consciousness must be very high and rare, because God used ideas first to create all things. And so the causal body is made up of these different ideas of God, which through his great consciousness he has fashioned into all things. It's just something we cannot comprehend. So great is the infinite Father. But at least 35 elements are found in idea, 35 elements in idea in the causal body, 19 in the astral body and 16 in the physical body. And how the infinite Father took those ideas, of course it took millions of years to create all these things in idea first. When it speaks in the Bible about the different cycles, it refers to many, 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 many years it took to create, that is, according to our time, these different three universes. First the causal, and then the astral, or the universe of energy, and finally the physical universe with which we are familiar. And we, being microcosmic creations of God, have those things within us. We have a causal body, we have an astral body of energy, and we know this physical body. But those were all made in ideas first, from the infinite Father. And if it took millions of years to do it, it is some great creation. And we have the secret of it in Genesis. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and they were without form and void. They were created in idea by the infinite Father. Just like when you paint a picture, you have the idea of it. Then you use your will to gather the forces together, and finally you have the picture painted. And so first, in this creation, what happened? God formed all these things in idea. All these, think of it, billions of universes, or not billions of suns and so forth, many, many universes, spiral nebulae and island universes. Think of it, he created all that in idea first. And so that took much time to do that. And also, later he created us in his own image, and we too were created with all our different forms in his idea first, through his ideas. And so it is very subtle, this causal body within us, which is a part of the causal universe. It is very subtle, and to understand it, We have to be one with God's consciousness. There's no doubt about it. We cannot reason it. We cannot infer it even. But one with his consciousness, as he knows, then we can understand it. We'll come to that a little later. We understand it, as you'll see in a few minutes, through wisdom. And wisdom comes only when we merge our consciousness with God's consciousness. You cannot imagine him in his creation of ideas, of creating all these things in sequence, which are happening and will happen for ages. So it gives you some idea of how great God is. But, as we made in his image, if we somehow shake off the shackles which keep us tied to his more gross creations, we can be one with his subtle creations, as I will point out clearly to you in a few minutes. But sufficient for now is that it is so subtle, we must be one with God's consciousness to understand. We must merge in that. Now there are three things important in creation. First are the ideas which God had. And then those ideas, the 35 ideas, the 19 astral ideas, and then the 16 physical ideas. How did he make those things into first the astral body and then finally this physical body? And not only that, but in creation. Astral world, idea world first, astral world, and finally this great physical universe. How did he do it? By will. That's why if somehow we can get hold of God's will, we too can be like he is. So remember, this was done by God's will. I remember Master asked one of the professors at Mount Wilson Observatory, I can't think of his name. It's a very familiar name. He asked him, wasn't it done by God's will? And the professor said yes. He felt that. So God's will is the thing. He's the one. And I have a little quotation from Guru Nanak, which I think you'll enjoy, about God's will. Now, the key to the causal body, as I have said, is found in Genesis. God first created heaven and earth in idea. Heaven and earth were without form. They must have been in idea. Then, by his will, he made first the astral or universe of energy, and then the physical universe. And we come in because we were made in his image the same way. First, God created heaven and earth as an idea. Then he quickened it. He quickened it, that is, he projected, just like the motion picture projects the little film in the booth, he quickened it by his will through his light. And that gave us, on the screen of space, these different universes and creations. And so he quickened it. Then energy atoms came into being. Energy atoms are the atoms in the body of energy, or the universe of energy, the astral universe and astral body, our body of energy, which is flowing through us, life force in our body. Then he made that. And then he coordinated the atoms into a solid sphere like this earth. And in us, he coordinated the atoms into the physical body with all its various parts. So it seems to me God had quite a job in doing all these. But such is Hindu philosophy about the creation. Now, you can reverse this. All molecules in this creation are held together by what? By God's will. So what happens if he withdraws his will, what happens? The earth again will dissolve into what? Energy. And then the energy will go back once more to consciousness. Or if you want to call it God's love. God created all things through love. But keep it as simple as you can. Just the three things. The idea of God, and then those ideas being quickened by his will and the formation of the atoms of energy, and then finally the atoms of energy being coordinated into this physical universe and this physical body in which we find ourselves. Now, reverse, as I have said, creation, and it resolves back into God. That's what we do in meditation. We reverse the creation. We finally end up as God's consciousness. Why, you say? Because He made it that way, that's all. Don't worry about how. Get in there somehow. They often say, a man once said to me when I was first starting practicing, he says, Doctor, he says, make the money somehow. No matter how, but make the money. So we got to get into God's consciousness somehow. If we once hook onto His will, or merge in His great will, we can do it, because we're made in His image. So, going on just a little further, God, or man as individualized soul, is essentially causal bodied. That body is a matrix of 35 ideas of which I have spoken, required by God as the basic or causal thought forces from which He later formed the astral body and then finally the physical body or gross body. Now, I'm just skipping over a few things so as not to make it too intricate. It's not intricate if you'll just be calm and in your meditation ask God to reveal to you. Because it's known through intuition, not through senses and intellect. And intuition is the power of the soul. It is not known by reason. If you try to reason it, you're defeated before you start. But by affection and love, God will come easily. Now we come to this point, which is a very important thing, because we are prevented from merging in God by these three bodies. The causal body, the astral body, and finally this gross, bothersome physical body. If we could somehow get rid of those things, then we could know God. We could be free. Because as long as there's a body in our consciousness, there's desire in us. And the soul, being what it is, cannot be seen except through some sort of a body. We see it in this physical body. Also, it can be seen in the astral body. And the causal body can be dissolved, so to speak, by one thing, which I'll come to in just a minute. The subtle body seems so subtle, the causal body seems so subtle, but it can be dissolved if you remember the Master's words, which I'll read to in a moment. And so, the soul being invisible by nature, soul being subtle by nature, part of God by nature, it is known or can be distinguished by the presence of a body, as the physical, astral, and the causal body. Now, these bodies come, why? By unfulfilled desires. So if you have any desires in the physical plane, get rid of them. You'll have to come back and take another one to work them out. Why not throw them out? Just have one desire for God alone. That won't bring you back here. That'll take you quickly or sooner through the other two bodies to freedom. So realize that desire is what holds us to these three bodies. And that's why yoga is so important, because it helps you to supersede these three bodies to freedom by the methods of the ancient science of yoga. And so the Master said this: so long as the soul of man is encased in one, two, or three body containers, sealed tightly by the corks of ignorance and desires, he cannot merge in the sea of spirit. And remember, desire holds you even to the astral body and the causal body. Every desire has to be fulfilled. We as God's children should want one desire, Him. We will reach Him sooner. Now, This is the important thing. When the gross physical body is destroyed by the hammer of death, the other two coverings, astral and causal, still remain to prevent the soul from consciously joining the omnipresent life. Now, this is the key I want you to remember. It has helped me very much, and I'm sure it will help you. When the desirelessness is attained, think of it, desirelessness, that seems impossible. But it can be attained through wisdom. In your meditation, and when you supersede this world existence and consciousness, and finally the astral existence and consciousness, then wisdom will come to you. And through that wisdom, what happens? Its power disintegrates the two remaining vessels. This is a very important thing. We can rise above the physical body in many ways. In sleep, in meditation, it's not difficult to do it. Or if someone hits you a good whack on the head, you'll soon lose consciousness of the physical body. But those other two are rather difficult to do. But here is the key. I'll read it once more. When desirelessness is attained through wisdom, its power disintegrates the two remaining vessels, and the tiny human soul emerges free at last. It is one with the measureless amplitude. See if spirit is easier to remember. So think, it's God's grace, isn't it, that frees us from the two remaining bodies? Nothing but that. Wisdom comes by being one with God's consciousness, and wisdom disintegrates these two bodies which we seem to think are so subtle and so far from being understood, and especially the causal body. But here you have the way. Do your meditation. Supersede the physical body. And then love God, and His grace will give you the wisdom so you'll have no more desire. If you know you're one with God, there'll be no desires there. This is a wonderful sentence which I dug out of the autobiography. When desirelessness is attained through wisdom, its power disintegrates the two remaining bodies, which are so subtle, cannot be known, even by reason and inference. But when the wisdom comes by merging in God's presence through His grace, they're easily disintegrated, because He's the doer anyway. This is a wonderful thing. Let us remember this, how the three bodies are dissolved. The first, you know, through your meditation, you can do it in sleep even, it goes. The other two are more difficult. But when desire goes, it's the desire that keeps us tied. When we realize we want one thing, and one thing is God and God alone, wisdom comes, which takes or disintegrates these two subtle bodies within us. So that's an important thing to remember. Now, we have to stop now, because when you get interested in this yoga business, time flies. Yoga means union with God. Now I have a few references which I'll give you at this time. First from Hindu philosophy, and most of it I take from the autobiography, which I feel is the greatest book on Hindu philosophy that has ever been written. And those of you I know who are familiar with it will agree thoroughly with that. And so let us read just a little bit from the autobiography. Or first from the Bible. First from the Bible. In Luke, the 17th chapter, the 37th verse, which reads as follows. Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. It's a very subtle meaning which I'll read to you. Wherever the soul is encased in the physical body, or in the astral body, or in the causal body, there are eagles of desires there. There are still eagles of desire. That's what is meant in this verse in Luke. These eagles prey on human sense weaknesses, or on astral and causal attachments. All the attachments we bring over are in these two subtle bodies within. Otherwise, why, when you are born, or people are born, do some have tendencies to go this way and some to go this way? Because those are brought over in those subtle bodies. And wherever the body is, there are the desires. And so we have, from our own Bible, reference to desires in this chapter in Luke. And then finally, they prey on human sense weaknesses or on the astral and causal attachments. And will also gather to keep the soul a prisoner in these bodies. So we cannot get out until, through wisdom, which comes by the grace of God, we have no more desires. We want Him and Him alone. Then the bodies automatically fall away. As Master used to say, when you bring in a light in the darkened room, where is the darkness? It falls away. Darkness, like a dark bird, flies away. So the same when you have no desire for anything but God. These subtle things, seemingly so subtle, will pass away. And finally, another reference is from the autobiography this time. That was from the Bible. As follows. To substantiate what we have been speaking about, how the body is created and the astral body. God thought out different ideas within Himself and projected them into dreams. Lady Cosmic Dream thus sprang out, decorated in all her colossal, endless ornaments of relativity. Think of the creation, relativity. Einstein wrote about it. It's a dream, the cosmic dream, comes from these ideas of God through His will. And then finally, in 35 thought categories of the causal body, God elaborated all the complexities of man's 19 astral and 16 physical counterparts. If that isn't a miracle, then nothing is. How God does these things. When you realize these things, the ego begins to fly away in the presence of God. And so, by condensation of vibratory forces, everything is a different rate of vibration. By concentration of vibratory forces, first subtle, then gross. First subtle. In the causal body first, then in the next gross body, the astral body. He produced man's astral body and finally his physical form. I know of nowhere where you can, in such simple terms, get the philosophy of creation as in Master's writings in the autobiography. Finally, from Guru Nanak for a little inspiration to keep us striving. As Larry Maharshal said, striving, one day the divine goal. Because we are made in the image of God, the path is open. His consciousness is flowing through us. If you relieve its attachment, it'll merge in the great ocean of His presence. And what is the key? God's will. Unite your will with His will, and it can be done. And from Guru Nanak, these wonderful words, submit thou unto His will. How simple. Submit thou unto His will. Thy mind shall evolve love, poise, and understanding. Love is the key. Love, poise, and understanding. Submit thou unto His will. Thou wilt attain wisdom and knowledge of the entire world shall dawn on thee. This is a wonderful passage in Guru Nanak. Attain the wisdom by submitting to the will of God, that His grace come into us. And with this, shall come the knowledge of worlds, and it shall dawn on thee. The sun comes up. Do we make the sun come up? No. And so with God. God's grace comes into you. You will know by being one with him, and the knowledge shall come naturally. Alone I can do nothing, but with thee, O Father, all things are possible according to thy will. So it's a wonderful passage from Guru Nanak to inspire us to keep at it, someday realizing the grace of God will help us to understand.